Hey guys, we are here live again. We're just waiting a second or two to see who shows up. Gets a few people here before we get started. Hope everyone's having a good evening. Hey, Joe and Sandy are here. Jared is up at all hours in the morning in Kenya actually watching. That's so awesome. So glad you're here. Hey, Marnie. Hey, Melissa. Mary's here. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We got a few people here. So I am Sabrena. I'm a grateful believer who struggles with codependency and food issues. Sheila, go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Hey, my name is Sheila, and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ who struggles with codependency and the effects of past abuse.
Hey, Sheila. So we have the great opportunity tonight to talk to each other and talk to you together. I'm so excited about this. And in a few minutes, Sheila's going to share a little bit of her story and talk about, how she got a little bit into CR and that kind of stuff. And but before we get to that, I wanted to just kind of again share about our summits that are coming. We had some more planning going on today with the national team, so I'm just getting more and more excited. How about you, Sheila?
Yeah, really.
Yeah, it's going to be a great time. Been hearing some talk about people that are talking in their CRs about the different things that they've learned at summits, and it's going to be no different this year about how refreshed they come back and how excited they come back about things they're going to be doing in their CRs. And so I just can't wait. I can't wait to do this, and we're super excited about the number of people we'll be able to reach. If you haven't heard about it, this is our Come Celebrate online summit that will be happening on July 30th and 31st. It's just $49 a person, which is absolutely amazing. And if you buy 5, you get the 6th registration free. So you absolutely need to jump on that. And as information comes, we're going to be sharing it with you guys. So keep tabs on the crsummits.com website because there's an FAQ section. And if there's a question that you have that hasn't been answered there, you just need to ask a question. You can actually add your question and it'll be answered there. So keep looking at that because updates will keep coming as we finalize things that we're going to be doing. So one of the things that we do know that is a common question is if you'll be able to view the summit after it ends, and we will have it up for 48 hours after it ends for you to watch if you happen to miss any of the sessions. So that's something that is really cool in case you're working or different things, childcare, whatever, you'll have some time to go back to those and watch them. So, and another thing to remember is that this is a summit for everyone. Usually our summits are geared towards leaders, but this time it's for leaders and participants and anybody you want to invite. There'll be some teaching, there'll be some inspiration, but there'll be all great stuff for anybody who wants to attend. So make sure, go to crsummits.com and get registered and ask your questions. And then before we jump into the topic, another thing that, a question that's been coming through to some of the state reps, Sheila, we were talking about this yesterday, and so you probably heard this from your reps, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
what are the requirements that we have from CR National about CR openings, CRs opening back up? And that is something that is absolutely a local policy issue. It's not something that the national team will make a decision for you as a local CR when you can open up, how many people can be there. It's going to be up to your local church, up to your local state, and you might be doing one thing with that, and a church down the street may be doing something completely different. Sheila, have you heard of any ways that people are thinking about doing that we can
Yeah.
maybe talk about some of that?
CR right now who they opened last week here in Ohio, and yes, they have done it very. They've really thought it out very well. Doing groups of 10 and having them separated in different areas of the church. They do men on one night and women on the other, just because of childcare issues, because you can't childcare right now. So they've just been really innovative in doing that. So yes.
Awesome. Awesome. So check in with your state reps because they can give you some guidance and maybe some thoughts and some pointers on how to do that and what they're doing or they're hearing about other people doing. So check in with them. You can find your state rep by going to celebraterecovery.com and click on CR groups, find your rep, and they'll be happy to share information with you about that. We had a question come through already. Dave says our CR will be doing a drive-through chip night later this month. Any pointers for us? So we did that at our CR a few weeks ago, and I've seen several other churches that have done it. What we did is we had, a table where people would come and drive and get those chips, and then our leaders and other participants were lined up in 2 rows in their cars, and the person would grab their chip, drive through, and the cars would honk and yell and, if you want party favors and, making different noises with that. And then if the participant wanted, after they went through, they'd get into that line at the back of it so that when new people were coming through, they could be, clapping for them as they come through with their horns. It's really encouraging and super exciting for people to be able to do that instead of having to wait on getting their coins. So I hope that's a good night for you guys, Dave. That's awesome. All right. Check in a little bit for any questions before we get going in the topic. Awesome. So you may have seen that what we're talking about tonight is the question, is loneliness really a choice? Is loneliness a choice? It's something that is talked about a lot in recovery, and a lot of us can identify with dealing with loneliness, and I would say especially in this time. Right now, we're restricted to home, and for some people, that means being alone. And so, how is that connected to loneliness, being alone, feeling lonely? What that kind of leads to that you have to deal with. Many of us can identify with having feelings of loneliness being around people. And so, how do we deal with that? How do we work through it? How do we process it? And it's something that Sheila actually has been dealing with herself lately and working through. And so she wanted to share some things about that. I'm going to interject. I'm going to ask some questions as we go along. But I'm really excited to hear what she has to say about this. And because loneliness for me is not something in general that I've struggled with, but lots and lots of people do. But I can identify with, as we go through, the feelings that are connected to it. And so we'll talk about that as well. So Sheila, why don't you go ahead and go ahead and get started?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about, the intro into how I got into recovery. 21 years ago, I went to my first ever recovery meeting. It was Al-Anon. And being the great codependent that I was, I guess I should have introduced myself. I'm a grateful believer who struggles with codependency and effects of past abuse. And so anyway, being that awesome codependent that I was, I went there to find out how to fix my family member who had addiction issues. But really what I found out was that as an adult child of a dysfunctional family, I was pretty messed up. And who I really needed to focus on was myself. I needed a savior, and I needed to figure out that I wasn't everyone else's savior. I attended Al-Anon for about 6 years, and then in 2005, I was introduced to Celebrate Recovery. And the rest is history. That's all I can say. I love, love, love Celebrate Recovery, the Ministry of Celebrate Recovery, and I have the T-shirt to wear to prove it right there.
That's awesome.
So, you know what? And the other thing is, I'm just really blessed that I got to serve in this ministry and to work with some really awesome people of God. And for me, I'm addicted to seeing change lives through the ministry of Celebrate Recovery.
Absolutely.
So, yes.
Absolutely. I can totally identify. I've been a Christian since I was 12, but until I started Celebrate Recovery, I was not able to get full healing, take responsibility for my own choices. No matter what I did, I just felt like there was this disconnect until Celebrate Recovery came into my life. So that is super, super huge. So thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your story. As we were talking yesterday, getting ready to do this live tonight, we were talking about a little bit about what you've been dealing with this topic and the things that God has been showing you about loneliness and being alone and how to deal with this during the pandemic and the time of the quarantine. So, can you share a little bit about what some of that has been for you?
Yes. Due to some, well, it kind of starts with due to some recent hurt and rejection. I've just really been struggling with feeling like I've been set aside in this one situation, and really questioning my purpose, and I've been grieving the loss. But also, along with that, I'm normally a pretty extroverted person, but due to my husband's chronic lung disease and him being quarantined, that means I'm quarantined.
Mm.
To the point of, like, he's a person that if he gets this virus, it's not going to be good. So at times I've just been feeling stuck in my circumstances. Now, that's not anything negative against my husband or that I don't want to be here doing that, but just feeling like, here I am, and how do I deal with all of this?
And I'm sure plenty of people can identify with that, right? This is something we didn't expect, and now
Right.
you're dealing with something on top of it that is a health issue that makes this a much bigger struggle.
Right. And this has allowed really some feelings of loneliness to creep into my life. But God already knew, because he had already was preparing me, I think, for this, because back in February, I started a Bible study with two of my CR sisters, and it really was looking at the deep roots of rejection. And this was before I knew about the coming pandemic. I didn't know how much I really didn't know how much I was going to need this relationship with these two ladies, and the Bible study that I was doing. And I am so grateful now that I didn't have to do this alone. I needed the support and the community of my CR family. And that always makes me think of Ecclesiastes 4, 9, and 12. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, there's no one to help them up. I'm sorry. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. And I remember when I first got into recovery, I'd been doing it all alone for years. Mm-hmm. So I'm so grateful for that, and in this ministry, that I don't have to do it alone.
Absolutely. I can identify with that as well. Like I've talked about before, how most of my relationships in my life have been very superficial because of the hurt and the struggle that I went through as a child and in my home, the dysfunction that was going on. So, this codependency starting at such a very young age, I just kind of kept people at arm's length because I didn't want to be hurt further. I didn't want to be abandoned, all these different things. I had friendships, but they were very surface level before Celebrate Recovery. I was always the listener person, the shoulder to cry on, instead of the person that actually shared what was going on inside of me. And kind of one of the biggest surprises for me in Celebrate Recovery has been developing deep female relationships that I have needed so much to lean on. I shared a few weeks ago in this on the CR Live that, in the beginning of my recovery, my husband was not a safe person for me. My safe relationships were those women and those open share groups and those step study groups. And I truly could not have done recovery and gotten through this process without them. And it's something that it's so important that we embrace. People come in to Celebrate Recovery. They will oftentimes keep people at arm's length. They have trust issues. So they're struggling to connect with people, and letting that guard down is really difficult to be able to let other women in. And so I definitely encourage you, if you don't have those relationships, those accountability partners, those friends that are going to be through with you and go through it with you, that you develop those. And in this time, most especially, be reaching out to people.
Right. And through this, one of the things that I realized is that being alone and feeling lonely, or feeling alone or feeling lonely are not the same things at all. You know, when you're alone, the word alone, it's more like a state of isolation or solitude, like, you know, you're by yourself, not being in the company of someone else,
Mm-hmm.
where loneliness describes a feeling of sadness or abandonment, right? Like, you know, just there's nobody there for me. There's just all kinds of those feelings that come about that come with that. You know, and here are just some questions that were presented in my study. The first one's, do I sometimes feel lonely in a crowd? Yeah, I had to check that. I had to check that mark as a yes.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes avoid contact with friends or family after I've felt rejected, like if they've said something or if I picked up on something that I felt like, you know, that just wasn't right. Then when I would leave that place, then I would just, you know, maybe not initiate a conversation with them. I would say, well, they need to call me, or, you know what I mean? And just go
Yes.
into that state of, you know, just
I'll
just
reject
not.
them.
Yeah. I'm not calling them. They can call me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that a couple of the questions were, do I walk into situation prepared with the fullness of God in me, like free to look for ways to bless other people, or do I walk into situations feeling lonely and expecting others to look for ways to bless me?
That's really
So,
good.
yeah. And when I realized that most of the time when I feel lonely, I can trace it back to some sort of hurt or feeling of being set aside. Rejection, being set aside, there's no one there, I'm on my own, blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah, on and on and on.
Yes, kind of feeding that feeling of once it starts, I'm feeding that. Nobody cares about me.
Exactly.
I am being rejected, and so I'm going to reject other people, but I'm also going to kind of feed into that instead of challenging it or trying to think about, like you said, the ways that can I be a blessing to other people. Or what I often talk about is like, do I go into a place of victim mentality so that I do stay stuck? Because that's always something that keeps me stuck. If I go to a place of being the victim in this situation, then I'm going to stay in that victim place, right? And so I know that I have choices in that situation. So, how are you learning to deal with those feelings of rejection and loneliness in a healthier way for you?
Yeah. Well, here's just some of the things that I've heard through this study that really relates and parallels with my recovery and what I think God is using to bring me to that next level of healing in that area. First of all, I have to put things into perspective. You know what I mean? You know, I can look at things two different ways when I have those feelings of rejection or loneliness. One, I can say, you know, I can either be set aside, I can look at it as being set aside, or I can look at it as being set apart. And it's actually two different things. Being set aside is like that feeling of rejection and dwelling on my insecurity, which is just going to lead me down a bad path.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I look at it as being set apart, that maybe God has a different plan in this that I don't even see. That there's a reason He's moving me from this place, because maybe there's something else that He has for me. He knows the plan, I don't. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? I just need
Absolutely.
to wait for it. I need to wait.
Yes. I always tell my sponsees, and I talk about this all the time, that they have to get sick of me saying things about what is the opportunity for growth in this situation. So I can focus on either the way someone else has treated me, and I can decide that it means something that about me and who I am, what my worth is, all of those kind of things. Or I can say, okay, Lord, what is it that you have for me to learn in this situation? Because every single situation that we find ourselves in a negative place, or when we're struggling with things, there is always an opportunity for me to learn something about me, and not in a way that is a selfish, it's all about me thing, but what is the thing that He has for me to learn so that I can become better prepared for what he has for me to help other people. And that it doesn't have to say anything about my worth. I like how you talked about dwelling in that insecurity. For me, when I feel rejected, I can either, like I said, go into that victim mentality, or I can challenge my thinking. That's been a huge, huge, huge part of my recovery, is challenging my thinking. Because I think something, I have to capture that and choose to either reject it if it's a lie, or allow it to be absorbed into me to say something about me. And I have to remember that I'm loved by God, that I am worthy in his eyes. And I can reject the lie that tells me I'm not loved or that I'm not worthy. And also reject the lie that everybody needs to like me or be happy with me, right? Like that, I don't have to take that on, because that just leads to feeling more rejected, right? So it's super important for me to challenge that thinking and go through the process of doing things like processing the feelings with my accountability or my sponsors. It's not that I need to push it away and pretend it's not there and act like I'm not feeling the way I am. I need to process those feelings and pray and challenge them, reach out to people, and not get into a place where I feed, well, they're too busy. They won't have time for me. They don't care about me, those kind of things, because that just feeds into that rejection.
Yep, absolutely. The other thing, that I realized is that I need to ask the right questions. I could ask why, or I can ask what. The why questions, I think, bring focus onto things over which we have no control. You know what I mean? When I'm asking why, I don't know what the answer to that is. And it makes me think of, my powerlessness. Principle one, realize I'm not God. I admit that I'm powerless to control my tendency to do the wrong things, and that my life has become unmanageable.
Mm-hmm.
So those questions be like, well, why me? Or why is this happening? Or why are they acting like that? Where, if I switch that and I ask what, I think the what questions bring about more awareness and helps me to move forward. So some of those questions might be, what is the one thing that I've learned from this? What are my unrealistic expectations in this relationship? And what is one positive change that I can, make to my attitude today?
Mm.
So really asking those what questions helps me to move forward instead of feeling stuck in my feelings and emotions.
Mm.
So the next thing is, what consumes me controls me. So whatever I'm focusing on is going to have control over me. And it makes me think of Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So how does that, renewing of my mind, how does that happen? Well, that leads to the fourth thing, to focus on the promises of focus on the promises of God and his truth.
Mm.
So how do I do that? And when I think of that, I think of principle 7, reserve a daily time with God for self-examination, Bible reading, and prayer in order to know God and his will for my life and the power to carry out and follow his will.
Mm.
So when I feel like, when I'm searching for acceptance outside of God's promises, it's really led me to some pretty dangerous places in my life. Mm-hmm. Chasing to make me feel full, relying on people, places, and things to fill what only God can fill.
Absolutely. Amen. I think about Alan and I did this marriage study years ago, and one of the things that has never left me was a statement about people in a marriage who are trying to get from each other what only God can give them is like two ticks without a flea. Or no, two ticks without a dog. I'm sorry, two ticks without a dog. It's like we were sucking the lifeblood out of each other, trying to get what we needed from the other person, and it wasn't there. We could never get it from each other. And so either getting that fulfillment from other people or from what we do, the things that we do in this life never are going to work. We're never going to be fulfilled by that. It needs to be a complement of those relationships, and the things we do are a complement to what we already have inside from God.
Absolutely. Agree. Another little tidbit, no amount of outside achievements can fix the inside hurts.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing on the outside is going to fix the inside. Those hurts and
Amen.
rejections can be healed by replacing those lies with God's promises and God's truth.
Absolutely.
And what I found that is when I resist God's promises, when I'm not thinking about God's promises, I can forget God's presence,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I'm
Absolutely.
in a place, I forget that God's with me. But when I rest in God's promises, when I rest in his promises, I can remember God's presence. And Matthew 11:28 and 30 says, through 30, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble at heart. And you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Today, with God's help, I'm focusing on wearing the yoke of God. I'm focusing on his promises and his truth. And you know what? I'm realizing that loneliness really is a choice. It all depends on me and what I do with my thoughts and my emotions. I can be alone without feeling alone or being lonely. So, how do I keep myself in check when I face these new circumstances and situations come about? First, I ask myself three things. Information. Have I sought God's truth regarding the situation? So am I focusing on God's truth? Second is application. Have I applied God's truth without compromise? And the last one is transformation. Do I own this truth as a personal revelation from God to be used in future situations like this? So information, application, and transformation. So I just want to ask all of you out there, what are you focusing on today? Are you wearing the yoke of God that leads to freedom, or the yoke of people which can lead down that path of rejection and loneliness?
Absolutely. One of the questions that I also always ask myself is, what does this say to me about me? And what am I believing it says to me about me? And that can feed into my rejection. If I believe that the way someone feels or a situation that I'm dealing with tells me that I am worthless, that I have no worth, that I am unlovable, that I am this or that, then that's what I have to check and realize that that's not the truth of what God's word says about me.
Absolutely. So I just want everyone to remember that being alone physically doesn't mean you have to feel alone or be lonely. I believe that just like me, you have a choice. So I'm choosing what I want to call R&R, which normally you think R&R, rest and relaxation, right? Well, I'm changing it a little bit here. I am choosing to reach out to my community and to rest in God's promises. So R&R, you're going to reach out to the community and rest in God's promises.
Amen.
So, and just this past week, I heard this little nugget in a podcast that I listened to. If you look back and remember what God has done in your past, you will be able to see that your future is secure as well, right? If you look back and you see what He's already done in your life, you can focus on that promise that He's going to do it in the future.
Absolutely.
He didn't leave you in the past, so therefore you can trust that He won't leave you now. And this really goes along with a promise that has been foundational for me throughout my years in ministry. Hebrews 13:5 and 6. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you.
Mm-hmm.
Say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? Remember,
Amen.
R&R. Reach out to your community and rest in God's promises. So just
Amen.
share.
That is awesome, Sheila. Thank you so much. I love what God is doing in this situation for you. You're taking this situation that you've been dealing with during this time, and instead of dwelling in that, you are learning about yourself, you're learning about God, you're learning about reaching out and how important that is. I think a lot of us have learned in this pandemic that those sponsors and accountability partners and those relationships that we have been building, or that you've been hearing about but haven't been building before this happened, you realize how very important that they are. So reach out, reach out, reach out, reach out is something that I can never, ever say enough to people, right? That is just so important. And resting in God's promises is the foundation of allowing you to be okay with whatever situation that you're in. And it doesn't mean that you're not struggling and that this isn't difficult. So please don't hear me say that. This is a difficult time, and there are difficult situations that have come out of it. And so how are you going to flip that around? How are you going to challenge your thinking? What are you going to choose today to believe? And what are you going to choose to do in your actions that are going to help you through the situation? So please remember to do that. If you don't have a CR community yet, if you have not been plugged into a local CR before this pandemic hit, I've just been so encouraged by how many people we've seen on these Facebook Lives saying, tonight's my first night even hearing about this program or joining live. I've not been to a CR yet. Maybe you've even joined a CR Open Share group, and that's your first exposure to Celebrate Recovery. I love that. That means that you are reaching out. And so if you are new here tonight and you don't have that experience, please reach out to a local CR. You can go to celebraterecovery.com, click on CR groups, and then click on find a group. You can put in your zip code and find a group near you. And I do recommend that you do that with a local group, as opposed to joining a group that's far away from you, because you can do that right now online, right? But it would be awesome if you can get connected to a local group so that once we are coming back and meeting together again, you'll have somewhere you can physically go. If a local CR isn't doing CR Open Share groups, that's when you would want to try to connect with maybe another group that is doing it for the time being. But when that local CR opens, you want to get there physically, because it's so important to be around people. So celebraterecovery.com, CR groups, find a group, and you can also click on find your state rep to get help with that process. So any last words that you have, Sheila, before we close? We're right at time.
Just reach out.
Reach out and rest in Him.
Rest in God's promises.
Absolutely. Guys, remember to go to crsummits.com and check that out. And if you have any questions, make sure that you're posting those. And we will see you tomorrow night. Oh gosh, I'm not even sure who it's with. I hope somebody posted on there with Ken and Tammy Hafner. Make sure that you come tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Figure out what that is in between, and we hope to see you there. Have a great night, you guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.